There's a really cool story of this Vietnam pilot, and during the war he was in battle, basically, but he had the opportunity to go back home, and so he entered this raffle. His name was Ronald Smith, and Ronald entered the raffle, and he actually won the raffle, so he could actually go back home if he wanted to. But after spending a little bit of time, I think, praying and thinking about it, he knew of his friend David, who wanted to go back, and he didn't get a raffle ticket. So David had a wife and a couple kids, 2 kids, and so he really felt like God wanted to have him give David this raffle ticket. So during the Vietnam War, he ended up giving David this ticket, and so he could see his family. And Ronald, being single at the time, he decided he's just going to focus on flying everyone back and forth back home. So he would transfer people from Vietnam, fly people over back to home, and then reunite people, at least with their families. And he said it was such an enormous joy just to do that, even though he did have to sacrifice his opportunity to be with his family. What was so interesting about this raffle, though, is that David, after coming back home from his temporary visit with his family, his young family, he was killed in the war shortly after. So Ronald realized, wow, I gave David, at my expense, I gave him one last time with his family. And he said, it is so much better to give than receive. And he did an act of service, and we hear the term service a lot. I think sometimes our culture gets it a little off, though, right? Because they may say, well, what services do you provide? And usually we're talking about a business. And we say, well, I can vacuum your chimney. I don't know if that's a thing. I can clean your chimney. I could scrub your floors. I could do these services for money, right? But when we're talking about Christian service, or service that is given at an expense to bless another person without expectation of reward or payment, can you give some examples of acts of service that people could do for free? What are some examples that either you've been helped by, or maybe you've also offered to other people? What are some examples? Automotive repair. Cool. Car wash. Yeah. Car wash, car repair. Yeah. And especially, too, because, well, one, it can be pretty time-consuming, cleaning a car. I mean, you could do it pretty fast, but it may not do that good of a job, right? So it involves time, or maybe special knowledge of how to properly fix a car, because cars are complicated and you don't want to break certain parts of them, otherwise they don't work anymore. So you need the whole thing to work properly, generally speaking. What are some other examples of acts of service that you have experienced, benefited from? I'm sorry? Feeding the homeless, yeah. Yeah, feeding people who have need in that way, yeah. So maybe being part of a food pantry or food distribution or something like that. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, like, buy food for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the coolest things for us that we received as we were having a newborn baby was a lot of people signed up to help us. And they're like, hey, we'd love to stop by, drop off food, drop off a meal, buy you food. Man, it was a huge help. It came at a cost to them, however expensive it was to buy food for a family. But yeah, it saved us an enormous amount of time. It was a huge blessing, and it was definitely a need that we had at that time. It was such a huge help. And we had, just awesome friends to pitch in and help us. So we know what it's like to receive a compelling act of service. Service, again, is very simply, it's not too complicated, but an act of service is doing a good work for another person. And it often implies a degree of sacrifice. What are some sacrifices we have to make when we are serving people? Time. Time and energy. Yeah, limited resources. Yes. What else do we sacrifice? Cash. Your wallet may be impacted. Yeah, what else? Did you say something, Brandon? Sorry?
I said finances, please say
Finances, yeah. Yeah. So it costs us our energy, especially if it's heavy lifting. Have you ever helped maybe someone move before? Move stuff? Oh, man. Yeah, let's move this desk around this tight corner or something. Yeah, so, I mean, that can be hard. It can be exhausting, right? Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to sacrifice, it's not particularly easy to do, especially some of the tasks we may be asked to do, right? So it costs us money and time and energy. It may also cost us our preferences. It may cost us what we would like to do. And maybe preferences in cleanliness, preferences in safety, preferences, any kind of preference, name it, right? So there are all kinds of costs that come with serving others, right? Or pride, yeah. It's funny because, it's funny you mentioned that because, actually we're going to talk about today, yeah. But it does cost us our pride, believe it or not. It does. Pride is essentially self-will, right? Pride is what I want to do with my own will. And the people that are servants, well, in order to be the best servant requires the least amount of self-will, right? The least amount of pride usually results in the best form of servanthood. So we're going to talk about that today. Ronald, again, back to our example with the Vietnam pilot, he said it's better to give than receive. And we know Jesus said it's better to give than receive. My question to you, and this is the question I'm asking myself, is how much do I actually believe that? Do I really believe that? Do I believe it's better to give than receive? Because we know that statement, and we take Jesus at his word, it's better to give than receive. But if I really believe that, wouldn't that affect my preferences? Would that affect my priority of giving rather than receiving? Like on a given day, what I would rather do today, would that be to give, or would I rather receive today? And that's the question that we're going to ask today. I saw this really funny video with Andrew Schultz. He's a comedian. He's an edgy comedian. He's pretty funny. And ironically, he was having a conversation with Jordan Peterson, who is, you would imagine, the total opposite of that kind of personality. But anyway, it's very fascinating. And Andrew Schultz, he said something interesting where he said, I was on Molly, which is a phrase indicating he was on a drug called Molly. And he said, I was on Molly, and I just had so much love, I just had to give it somewhere. So I was high, and I was calling all my friends and just saying, I love you, and I just had to show my love to all my friends, right? And Jordan Peterson was acknowledging the fact that, it is actually incredibly joyful to give to other people. It's a deep kind of joy that is very different than the reception of it. The ability to give it, actually there's so much joy in serving other people in that way. Now obviously, it's a mixed metaphor, right? Because we're to be not, drunk or high or those sorts of things, but filled with the Spirit. But the point being that out of this excess, this individual is feeling, they felt like they couldn't contain it, and they had to give it away, right? So that's the question: is how do we develop that heart of service? How do we say deeply within our heart, yes, it is so much better to give than receive, and it is actually my preference to do that, right? Now we could do it from a very legalistic standpoint and just say, oh, you're so, evil, my heart. You're talking to your heart. You're just so evil, and stop that and do this, right? But Jesus is going to show us in a very beautiful way, I think, and symbolically, how it's actually so much easier to be a servant once you have been served in a certain way, right? So what if everyone served each other? Think about how our world would look like. What if everyone was a servant? What if everyone served and preferred each other, considered others more valuable than each other, and served each other and got along and loved each other well? They loved their enemies. They would rather give than receive. Well, that sounds almost like heaven, right? It sounds quite different than our world. And unfortunately, our world has found that if we serve our own self-interest, then we eat each other. And we're going to take a look at how Jesus' way is the better way. But it starts with being served by him, and that is what changes us. And the only service that will really glorify God is one in which we've received the love of God, we've been served by him, and it results in a changed heart. It results in us actually becoming more and more like Christ. It results in us becoming more and more selfless. It also results in wanting to be eager to serve. The Bible talks about, in the book of Titus, it says in chapter 2 at the end, it talks about how Jesus has essentially cleansed us on the cross. He's forgiven us. And the resulting effect is that it results in us being eager to do good or eager to serve. So that's the question is, are you eager to serve? Because there are times where we're not. Let's be honest. There are times where we're not. But I think that the most effective way, and for us to have a heart of servitude, is when we are really receiving the depth and reality of how Christ has served us. So let's get into it. Let's turn to John chapter 13. John chapter 13. All right. Verse 1, John chapter 13. It was just before the Passover Festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. I love that last part. I don't know if you really catch it as you're reading this passage on your own, but this one really stood out to me, is this idea of having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So even until the very end, Jesus is going to love his own. He knows that his hour is coming. Pretty much now until the end of the gospel, it's going to be about the passion of the Christ. It's going to be about his suffering, his journey to Calvary, the cross, for us. I love how it says, having loved his own, he loved them to the end. Because we know in a little bit what's going to happen. We know that his disciples are not going to reciprocate that. Actually, his disciples are going to fall short, and they are not going to love him to the end. He's going to be betrayed by one of them who's sort of the leader, if you will, is going to act as if he's never met Jesus before. And all the other ones are going to run away from Jesus. They're going to scatter. Actually, one guy is so desperate to get away, he runs away without clothing. That's what it says in one of the Gospels. One guy, he runs around, he's a streaker, and so he runs away. He's trying to avoid getting caught. And that's what happens. And his disciples aren't able to stay up with him at night when Jesus is praying and Jesus is by himself. And even still, it says Jesus loved them to the end. That's cool. I like that. It shows how he loves us to the end. Let's go on to 2-5. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So already the devil is prompting Judas to betray Jesus. So there is a mole, there is someone in their midst, an imposter, a sus individual. This is Judas, and he is the person who is going to stab Jesus in the back. And actually the religious leaders need someone like this. They need someone to betray Jesus because they're not able. They've already tried to capture him, and they were going to pick up stones to stone him in public, but they're afraid of the crowd. So they need someone on the inside to betray him. And Satan has prompted Judas to betray the Lord. I love in verse 3, though, it says that Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. So Jesus already knows that he has dominion over everything. Jesus is king. He's ruler over everything. So everything's under his power. He also knows that he came from God. He knows his origin and identity. And it says that he's returning to God, so he knows his purpose. So Jesus knows who he is. He knows where he's going in his purpose. And then it says, because of that, because of his identity and his purpose, Jesus then does this. So you would expect at this point that Jesus is going to do the craziest miracle you can ever possibly imagine. I don't know if you've ever thought about what Jesus could have done in this moment. Maybe he wants to make a new human being appear out of nowhere and he just snaps his fingers and a new person just shows up. Or maybe he wants to make the entire country of Israel just float in the air, kind of like that one Bioshock game. Bioshock, whatever the third one was, and it's just floating in the air. Jesus could create a new moon or new planet and like, hey, look, guys, here it is. Hi. You want to hang out with me? What's he doing? Okay. Is he tired? Oh, okay. He can hang out with me if he wants. So anyway, imagine what Jesus could have done in this moment. Or maybe he wanted to raise like 50,000 dead people. Because he already raised Lazarus. He's like, you guys thought that was a big deal? Watch this. I can do 50,000, right? And he could have done that. But what's amazing is that in light of Jesus knowing he's going to go to the cross, he's going to do something seemingly ordinary, yet it's profound. So what Jesus does is he actually removes his outer garments. And this is, by the way, not before the meal. This is interesting because they're going to wash their feet. But usually you would wash the feet before the meal, like as people are entering. Well, why? Because all the roads are covered in horse crap. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures from the good old days, like the early 1900s before the Ford Model T. Like roads used to be filled with horse crap all over. And actually, for a lot of the homes, that's why they had those big stairs on the sides of the street, because then they would provide some buffer space between all the poop in the road and the doorway. So they wouldn't have the doors right near the street. They would have stairs to buffer it. So anyway, they would usually have the lowest slave, as someone is entering in, wash their feet. But Jesus, interestingly, during that Last Supper meal, this Passover meal, he's sort of interrupting it, and he decides to wash their feet. Also, what's interesting, I don't know if you noticed, but he takes the towel and he wraps it around his waist. And it essentially doesn't say he removes it, but he leaves it there. So he washes his disciples' feet and he dries it with the towel that was still wrapped around him. So in other words, Jesus is physically posturing himself on the ground on his knees before his disciples. So he's doing the lowest job of the lowest slave. He is also serving his disciples, which, by the way, is countercultural because at this time no disciples would be on the receiving end of service from their teacher. It would actually be quite the opposite. If you're a disciple, that means you have to serve your teacher all the time. But Jesus does the grossest. And have you ever touched someone's foot? Or like, some people like feet. I don't like feet. That's not my thing. But Jesus is touching these gross, filthy. People don't take baths. People probably have all kinds of fungi on their feet. I don't know. But Jesus is getting down and dirty, and he is washing their feet. And he is not just a rabbi, he is the rabbi. He is the teacher of teachers. He is the king. And he is bending down, kneeling in front and lower than his disciples. So Jesus is demonstrating a pretty deep humility and a heart posture in front of his disciples. and he's doing something, it says that because he loved them to the end. So there's something about this demonstration that communicates love. Let's go on to verse 6 through 11. He came to Simon Peter, verse 6, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. So Peter counters this offer, and he essentially is saying, "Are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus is saying, "Well, you don't quite understand what I'm doing right now. Later you'll understand, but I'm demonstrating something to you in this moment. I'm teaching through my action." And Peter says very emphatically, "You shall never wash my feet." But there's actually a little bit more to this. The translation doesn't quite encompass, but it basically says, "You are never going to wash my feet in all of eternity." That's essentially what he's saying. He's saying there is never going to be a time between now and the rest of forever where you will ever wash my feet. He is definitely not cool with this idea, especially in light of who Jesus is. And this is at the end of Jesus' ministry. They've seen him do everything. They've seen him feed all these people and cast out all these demons and heal and raise people from the dead. Jesus has done all the things. And Peter is saying, "You're not going to touch my feet." That is certainly not something that you are supposed to be doing. Actually, I should be washing your feet. And Jesus says, "If you don't let me wash your feet, you're not with me." Well, that sounds like a pretty important foot washing then. Okay, well, if I don't accept this, then that means I don't get to be with Jesus. So Peter's like, "Okay, well then in that case, you're gonna have to wash my whole body," and Jesus is like, No, Peter, it's okay. I'm not saying take a bath. I'm just saying you're gonna have to let me wash the soles of your feet. I'm gonna have to wash symbolically as I'm washing the soles of your feet. It's showing that you are dirty. Your feet are dirty. And in the same way the soles of your feet are dirty, your soul is filthy. And actually, it's filthier than his feet. It's filthier than the fungus and the horse crap and the dirt all over his feet. And Jesus is soberly telling him, "Peter, you need your soul to be washed. You need a new heart. You need to be cleansed." And so I love Peter. Peter's always that guy who just, he's so enthusiastic all the time. He's the first one out of the boat trying to walk on water, and he's always the first one to say something. And I love his enthusiasm, but Jesus is pointing to something. He's saying, "I'm doing something now, and you're uncomfortable with it. Wait till pretty soon, where I'm going to do something even deeper than that. I'm actually going to serve you in such a way that it's going to cost me significantly more than just my perception of being superior right now. It's going to cost me everything." Because Jesus, in a few moments, he's going to be mocked, he's going to be crucified, he's going to be stripped of everything, his garments, and he's going to be mistreated beyond words. But he's showcasing to them, "You need to let me serve you. And if you don't receive my service, then you don't get the benefit of what I'm going to offer you." And so with this, they don't quite understand. But Jesus is going to go even lower in a few moments. As he is ironically lifted up on a cross, he is also going to be plunging into the depths of hell and the wrath of God. And he's going to do that because he is our humble servant. And he's also, ironically, our king. Let's go to verse 12 through 17. Jesus does mention at the end that there would be someone to betray him. And it's so fascinating how Jesus already is aware of how Satan has entered Judas, but Jesus is still washing his feet, and he's still going to die for him. And it says that even still Jesus loved even Judas to the end. Verse 12, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you, he asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so. I like that. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so. For that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So Jesus says, I am the teacher. Yeah, you have other teachers, and you might have other quote-unquote lords, but I am the teacher and the Lord. And it's good for you to say that, because I am that. But then he says, and therefore, because of this, then you are to wash one another's feet. You should do that. And no servant is greater than his master. So what Jesus is going to challenge them to do is to do this very thing. Not necessarily washing he's not saying literally, you guys got to wash each other's feet. I know it's gross, but you guys got to do it. That's what I'm calling you guys to do. It's bigger than that. It's not merely the act of washing feet, but what Jesus is saying is, I want you guys to have the heart posture of a servant, willing and eager to work for the benefit of each other. So Jesus has set an example, but he wants this reciprocation to happen amongst the disciples. And when that's happening, you have a beautiful picture of how God originally intended the world to be and how we've ruined it with selfishness. But that was God's intention. Turn to Matthew 20, verse 25. Matthew 20, verse 25. Okay. Matthew 20, 25 through 28. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. See, in this world, we have a hierarchical structure that's kind of like a pyramid or a triangle, right? That was not an Illuminati thing, don't worry. I'm not a part of them. But anyway, so there's this hierarchy, right? And they're heads above other people, and those people are heads of other people. And he's saying that that's how the Gentiles operate. There are people who are over people, and their leaders lord it over them. So he's saying there's going to be corruption of power. There's going to be some form of oppression, at least somewhat, in certain ways. And he says that in this way, that's how the Gentiles operate, is a lording of power over people. But not so with us. And Jesus is saying, actually, that a life of greatness is really a life of service. That's really the marker of greatness, is how good of a servant you are. That's the life that Jesus is calling us to. And if nothing is too low for Jesus, namely, he was willing to show them, hey, I want to serve you lower than the lowest slave. And actually, I'm going to serve you even lower by being treated like the worst criminal possible in your place. And because of that, it's going to have a profound effect on people. And he says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great must be your servant. Because Jesus did not come to serve. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. I love that. I love how we have a leader who does that for us, who paves the way by service, a real act of service. And it's the best form of service, right? Because it's a service that Jesus provided for us that actually is so costly you couldn't pay for it. It's ask yourself, how expensive is God? How much does Jesus cost to God the Father? Is there a price on that? No. So Jesus offered himself, and again, it said he had dominion over everything. So even though he's going to be betrayed, Jesus has dominion over everything. So Jesus, being of infinite worth to the Father, he provides an infinite service to us, a cost that is infinite. And at the same time, you don't have to pay for it because Jesus paid for it. You've never been served like that by anyone else. Maybe sometimes you hear of instances at which someone died for someone else. That's like the closest it gets, but not at the level where God's Son was punished in this way to receive eternal life, which no one else, unfortunately, can pay for us. So nothing is too low for Jesus. And this reality, this idea that Jesus served us, this is what changes our heart to be servants. I loved how I heard this one church, they were testing their pastors. And one of the tests was they had to go with the lead pastor to, let's say, like a Starbucks or some kind of public bathroom or something, and had to ask them, hey, can we clean your bathroom? And that was part of the interview process to be a pastor. It's like, wow, I like that. That's cool. Because if you're too proud to clean a bathroom, then Jesus is saying you're not a good servant, right? Like that means you're like a Gentile lording it over people. And if you want to be a servant, that means you have to do the lowest things, right? I'll be honest, my heart has not been very gentle or lowly. As much as I would like to think that it has been in the past, it really hasn't. And there were certain times where I noticed my heart was not in a good posture of servitude. I noticed this especially in this college group I was a part of because they had food in the morning on Sundays, and it was before the main service time. And they always had breakfast. It was always prepared for us, and then people would clean up for us. And I think I only helped out one time out of all the 4 years I was there to help, because I was just thinking like, well, they got it. Look, everyone's busy, and, don't want to get in anyone's way, right? So, and then, but I didn't notice that about myself. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I think I was telling myself, well, I'm serving in the youth group, so I'm doing something, right? So I kind of compartmentalized my service, if you will. It's like, well, I'm already doing this, so I don't need it, But see, there was something I could tell off in my heart. And I noticed especially when I went to this trip for school. We went to Israel, and I had this one friend, David, my roommate, if you will, and he was always trying to help unload the bags off the bus. So people, we'd be driving to different locations, and he'd be the first one like diving in there, and he would like take all the bags off and make sure everyone got their bag. Oh, is this your bag? Oh yeah, this is your bag, right? And I remember just looking at him and like, why don't I want to do that? I don't really have much of a desire. Yeah, I just don't really want to do that. And then this other guy, Nathan, he was also on the trip. And during the trip too, it was like all muddy from our travels, right? And he actually spent like a whole evening with our bus driver just to clean out all the mud on the floor of the bus. And I remember he got like a yellow lollipop just as a thank you. And I was like, I want one of those lollipops. But I remember just like, man, something's wrong here. Yeah, why don't, what I see in my brothers, their heart to just serve people without a return, why is that not being worked in my heart right now? And I realized, I think a lot of my trying to motivate myself to serve was not so much out of the fact that Jesus had served me. It was more just like out of duty. Like, David, you just need to serve, so just serve. But then I realized I didn't really ever have that motivation to do it that came out of an overflow. It was just kind of like more of a duty-based, well, I'm supposed to serve because that's what Jesus did, right? But I never really had, during that season, the heart that I saw in my brothers. My parents also cleaned our apartment one time when I moved to a new place, and it was covered in ants, it was filthy, and it was just really gross. So my parents just said, "It's okay, David, you got to go do something, we'll take care of it." And so they're down there and scrubbing and cleaning everything, and they cleaned the whole place, and it was spick and span. It was like a completely different place, and they were sweaty, and they spent hours and hours doing it. But I was like, yeah, I mean, I want to have a heart like that. And actually, we were moving out of another place with some other roommates, and someone's mom who, I don't know why, but she was like, I would love to like clean your place as you guys are leaving. And like, really? What, you would love to clean the place? Yeah, I just would love to serve you, and I love cleaning. And so she cleaned the whole place for us. And I was like, man, I want a heart like that, And I think as I really just continue to grow in and appreciate and just be transformed by what Jesus did for me, that it really has melted my heart. It has actually changed the affections of my heart to want to serve people. And not merely because it makes me feel good, or not merely because people might think well of me, or those kind of ulterior motives, but genuinely from a place of, wow, Jesus has served me, and therefore, man, how can I not want to serve other people? And that's the heart that Christ is calling us to. And it does come at our expense. And the only way to serve Christ is to be served by him. Dane Ortland writes this book called Gentle and Lowly. He says, the cumulative testimony of the four Gospels is that when Jesus Christ sees the fallenness of the world all about him, his deepest impulse, his most natural instinct, is to move toward that sin and suffering, not away from it. It's natural and fleshly of us to just say, well, there's a lot of hurting people out there, there's a lot of need, and I'm just going to go over here and, get away from it, right? But Jesus is moved by compassion because he loves people. And when we're affected by how Jesus has served us by dying for us, that changes us. And that actually gives us the courage and motivation to want to meet the needs of people, even at our expense, even when it costs us, even when it's not our preference. Might not even be to a crowd of people who you would prefer to serve. Go ahead and let's turn to 1 Peter, actually. 1 Peter 4. This will be the last passage we'll turn to. 1 Peter 4, 8 through 11. 1 Peter 4, 8 to 11. Yeah, it's one of the last books of the Bible. Okay. 1 Peter 4, 8. Verse 8, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. So Peter's exhorting his audience to love deeply with genuine affection and warmth, to love, and therefore when they love deeply, it'll cover offenses. It's hard to serve people who you hate, if that makes sense. But if you love them, well, it's significantly easier to serve people, right? And it's also significantly easier to not hold grudges if you genuinely love people, right? Offer hospitality without grumbling. The implication is that being hospitable and welcoming to people does come with opportunity to complain, because sometimes people are complicated. And sometimes you get your toes stepped on, or I don't know, whatever the issues might be, right? But Peter's saying that we're to offer hospitality, welcome people in to our lives, to our homes, to bless them without complaining about it. And I also love this too, is that God's picture for his people is participatory. So what I mean by that is he describes us as a priesthood of all believers. So what that means is that there are no such things as like sideline or audience Christians. There's no such thing as people who just sit back and We're going to let the players do their thing, and I'm going to sit in the stands, and I'm just going to kind of observe the church do its thing. God's opinion is we're like a body. So each body part and organ and muscle and bone has a function and purpose, and we are the body of Christ. And so with that, we have gifts. So I like Justice League. I'm probably more of a DC fan in general just because I'm a Batman fan. I know that Marvel's been dominating for a long time now. But anyway, it's interesting how every superhero has a superpower. That's kind of the implication. But the only superhero in that crew who doesn't have one is Batman. And so people make fun of him all the time because he has no superpowers. And they kind of make it like, oh yeah, he's rich, or he has gadgets, or I don't know, whatever. That's his superpower. But in God's economy of the kingdom, there actually are no Batmans. There are no Christians without a spiritual gift. So each one of us has something to offer. It's called a grace gift, or the charismata. These are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So you can think of them as superpowers. These are supernatural giftings that God wants to provide opportunity for us to use. And God wouldn't give us spiritual gifts unless he intended for them to be used. So you might be asking yourself, well, I don't really know what my spiritual gift is. And that's okay. We're gonna work on it. I'm planning on sending you an email with a list of spiritual gifts. And a lot of them may look very foreign to you and you have no idea. And that's okay, because some of those things are discovered through experience. So I didn't know I had the gift of teaching until I started teaching the Bible, right? So it's hard to find out what your gifting is unless you have opportunity for experience. So that's okay. So we're gonna work through some of those things. But in addition to that, sometimes we do have our own objections, right? We do have our own objections, but the reality is we do need to do God's work in God's power for God's glory. And in order to do that, we need to have a posture of receptivity to what God might have us do. And that posture is not so much how I can make my life the most successful life possible, because then that's still selfishness. It's like still living for yourself. But the posture is, God, in light of what you have done for me, how can I love your people well? Because you love me. So that might be one objection, is you don't know what your spiritual gifts are. Or maybe you just don't want to look incompetent. Maybe it seems a little risky to try something, and you just don't know that you should try something, and you don't want to look dumb, however that might look. There's actually one time where a church had need for me to lead music, and it was a couple hundred people in the church, and I was thinking, why are they asking me? I don't know how to sing. I can't play an instrument. I can play the cello, but that is not the same as like a guitar or piano to lead with. So, and it was like the little kids too, right? So I was thinking, like, they're dumb. They're not going to know any better. So I got my cello, and I turned it to the side, and I, like, fake strummed it, And I would, like, sing the songs, and I was like, I think after a couple times, I was like, this is actually working. Like, they can't tell the difference. No big deal. And then I overheard, like, I think the next week or something, some kid's like, yeah, that guy can't even play, and he's, like, trying to lead the songs and stuff. And then I was thinking, like, dang, okay, I couldn't deceive them. But anyway, yeah, they had a need, and I helped, and I did not want to do that because I felt incompetent, and I was. And but I think ultimately God at least maybe was testing my heart posture, like, David, in light of the fact that you might look pretty dumb, like, are you at least open to serving me, because there is a need? And so I did find a workaround, and I did find a girl in the college group who actually could do those things, and then I played the cello on the side when she actually could sing and play the keyboard. So anyway, we sometimes don't want to look incompetent. We don't like that feeling. We don't want to be used as free labor, right? We don't like the idea of being used. And, there are some church contexts in which people are objectified and used as pawns, but I hope you never feel that way in our church community. I hope you feel valued like a human being. So, I can understand that for sure. Sometimes there are objections of I don't have time, and some of us have crazy schedules right now, and I get that. But the question in whatever season of life is, do you at least have a heart posture to serve? Is that there, regardless of if you have a ton of time or a little amount of time, right? And so what we do want is to be able to provide opportunity in the future for you to serve. But my question is, as we're still developing things for the church, we're developing some opportunities to serve and do outreach, serve at the OC Rescue Mission. I dropped off some food at the school nearby. They were super stoked about that. And so we're still developing some relationships and opportunities in the future. But my question is, as we are still trying to develop opportunities to serve, do you have a heart posture right now that is at least willing to serve? And as you're having conversation with people in church or your neighbors or friends, do you have the openness to want to serve, even at your own expense? And I'm going to close with this, so I had 4 opportunities last week to serve, and it was driving related. And it was funny because I never get that in one course of the week, especially like let's say 4. Maybe at most 1, but usually not. But it was cool because for those instances, there was in some sense a cost. But what was cool is that for the first one, I drove one of my coaches, his wife needed to go to the airport. And I said, it's okay, I'll do it for free, don't worry about it. And so anyway, I drove her to the airport. She was super grateful. And then it was so funny because I didn't ask for compensation, but I had previously paid money to him for a service that he provided for me. And it was funny because he actually gave me all the money back that I had previously given to him, plus some more. And so I was like, that's really funny. But that was cool. But it was cool just to I loved how God actually worked in my heart to get to the point where I would willingly say, hey, I will do this for free. I'm not expecting something from you, But that's God. That's how God works in our hearts. That's not something David did on his own. That's the Holy Spirit, right? And what was also really funny is this one guy. I drove this one guy to the airport through Uber. So I was talking about my story, and he said at first he's like a rocket scientist. And I'm thinking, he's going to be one of these guys. He's going to hate Christianity or I don't know, whatever I thought. And so anyway, he's like, what do you do for work? And I told him a little bit of how I spend my time. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. And so, he's really into his faith. He is super into his faith. And I was like, wow, this is super surprising. So anyway, he was asking me about church planting and all that stuff. And he was inspired by some of the stories I was saying. And so he gave me a $50 tip or something. I was like, whoa, okay, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, it's totally cool. So then I go pick up another person after that. And as they are entering the car, I look behind and I see a briefcase. I'm like, oh, crud, he left his briefcase and he had to fly away and stuff. So I'm like, dang, okay, well, it's probably him and I need to get it back to him. So I was looking through his briefcase, and I promise it wasn't suspicious the way I was looking through it. I wasn't trying to rummage through. But I was just looking for some kind of contact info, and I found an email, right? And so I emailed him, and I said, hey, I don't know if you left for your flight yet, but just let me know an address, and I'll ship this to you. And I was thinking it's the least I could do because he tipped me $50. And so anyway, he had also somehow called that I didn't see the call. And so I called him back, and he's like, hey, I haven't left yet. Can you drop off my briefcase? I was like, yeah, of course. And so I go over there, again, just to just to help him out, And then he gave me another $50 tip. and then he's like, I'm just so grateful, thank you. And then he's like, yeah, and what's your church name? I'm going to donate to your church too. I was like, I'm thinking okay, this is kind of a lot, we're okay, But anyway, I was like, okay, here you go. He's saying, hey, I want to donate to your guys' church. And I was just thinking, wow, that was fascinating. And then I do some research on the guy because I was like, well, I have his first and last name. So who is this guy? He turns out he ends up being the VP of Lockheed Martin. Yeah. And so it was just a big company. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, that's who I was driving. So it's just so funny, when you have that heart posture with Jesus to just serve him and serve other people, God fills in the gaps, and also God does really cool things. So be open to that this week. I hope you can have a cool story this week about that. Yeah.